Afternoon, everybody. My name is Debbie van Tonder, and I'm going to talk today about is boss the boss of you? So I'm going to focus on burnout stress syndrome and learning how to become the boss of boss. So the agenda is looking at what is boss, looking at the contributing factors to develop boss, the stress vulnerability bucket and boss, do I have boss, and becoming the boss of boss. The World Health Organization recognizes boss as an occupational phenomenon that has an impact on our health, our mood, productivity, and mindset. If we have enduring and chronic stress, this will contribute to burnout stress syndrome. And the syndrome I've highlighted in red to show it is a collection of symptoms. So it's not just one feature. There's quite a few features of burnout stress syndrome. And we have to have a combination of all of them to really be able to say that we have boss. And boss is a real risk when chronic stress builds up and makes it harder for us to function. And everybody is susceptible to it. It's not an indicator of bad or good mental health, but it means that all of us have to be aware of it and we look after ourselves to prevent us from perhaps developing boss. And 93% of adults in the UK identified with some feature of burnout. And I couldn't find statistics on Ireland specifically, but my sense is that we probably would have the same type of percentage in our population that have burnout. So it is really important to note that it is, although the World Health Organization defines it as a work-related mental state, it is not actually isolated to work in itself. We have to see it as in a wider context than employment. And it includes everyday structured and goal-directed activities that can create pressure and stressful situations due to life's competing demands in general. So we can look at volunteers, and we know volunteers play such an important role in our society, but even volunteers can get burnt out and can actually develop what we call carer fatigue and could start to take on the burden perhaps of other people's problems as well. Students can suffer from burnout, and athletes, and especially if we look at professional athletes and we just think of the Olympics that's just over, like how burnt out some of those athletes must be after training for years and years and years to compete at the Olympics. And burnout is present in all of our lives. It is not isolated to specific people or specific groups. Every single one of us are at risk to develop burnout. So the contributing factors to developing boss is really financial stress. Like all of us will know that the competing demands on our finances, and if we think of the increase in the cost of living over the last number of years, have made it very difficult for people to perhaps pay rent, and might have had to move to areas that's cheaper in rent, and so on. And everything increases, but often people's income doesn't actually increase at the same time. Physical health challenges, working arrangements, loneliness, poor sleep, parenting, as I've mentioned, caring for others, and difficult relationships can often be contributing to developing burnout stress syndrome. If we look at the Yerkes-Dodson stress performance curve, we all probably be quite familiar with it. And so it's just to remind, when we're actually in the drone zone or in the gray zone, boredom and being underperforming or there's not enough demands on our intellectual capacity, or that we're actually quite bored at work, that can often be as stressful of having too many demands and being really too busy to be able to actually do everything that you need to be done. And then if we look at the healthy area, is really the creative calm zone, and the ideal would be probably to work at about 85% or 80% of capacity, and that would probably bring us right up to there. But most of us, and I know, talking to colleagues and friends and everybody, most of us probably work where the intended performance curve is. And you can see when we look at the intended performance area, it's already over the peak the area where we have our peak performance. We're already declining in our performance, but because often we have the sense of if we do more and if we perhaps overwork to some extent, that we will do better, or we will perform better, but actually it's a fallacy. We actually don't. We're then already going into the fatigue and exhaustion zone. We're heading towards ill health and panic and perhaps breakdown and burnout zone, which then heads into mental ill health zone. So we often might think we are here, but we're already in the unhealthy zone. And when we start to get into the fatigue zone, we need to become aware of our own red flags. If you leave work every day really exhausted and really tired and don't have any energy for anything else, your red flag should be going off, and your warning signs should be sending some alarm bells there. So it really is important that we perhaps look at where we're at and looking at our capacity. Are we at 100% all the time, or are we able to pull back slightly and work at about 80%, 85%, leaving a little bit of fuel on the tank so that we don't run out of fuel if we in the middle of a big project, or just become exhausted and start to develop, perhaps our immunity goes down, starting to become unwell and developing lots of flus and just physical health problems because we just so burnt out. We don't have that physical resources anymore. Then one of my favorite things to look at stress and ways to look at stress is the stress vulnerability bucket. And a lot of you would be very, very familiar with the stress vulnerability bucket. And it's such a nice way to look at stress and to look at where we are with stress. So all of us are born with a stress bucket. And everybody's bucket is different. It's a different size and can take different, have a different capacity for stress. But it doesn't matter how big your bucket is. The fact that you have a bucket, and all of us can manage our own bucket, according to the size that we have. And we all by now should have some sense of with how much stress we can cope, and what our healthy copers are and what our unhealthy copers are. So really, if you look at the taps at the bottom of the bucket, that's our healthy copers, and we open the taps and we drain the water out of the bucket. And by draining the water out of the bucket, which is the stress, of course, we open space up on top of the bucket for more water to come in, and then we don't get overwhelmed, because as the stress comes in, it drains at the bottom because of our healthy coping mechanisms. And that could be healthy diet, good sleep, good exercise, having support systems, using support systems, making sure we socialize enough, all of those healthy copers that we probably all quite familiar with. But then again, life happens, and if you can see this bucket was for students, academic stress, environmental stresses, perhaps sharing homes and with housemates and all of that, interpersonal stress. All of that can add to our, will add to our stresses going into the bucket. And if you look at life's transitions, going from student or from college to work life, from work life to married life, married to having children, becoming parents, becoming grandparents, all of those things can obviously will add to our stress at the bottom, at the top of the bucket. And our healthy copers will drain it, and we will have the normal stresses going forward, maybe have a flat tire, maybe having to take the car to the NCT and all of that. That's our normal stresses, daily life stresses that will add into the bucket, and it will drain as we do cope with normal life stresses. Sometimes though, we can just feel a bit overwhelmed if there's maybe something extra coming in that we didn't plan for or something like that, and then we could be using unhealthy coping mechanisms that will automatically close our healthy copers and will close the taps, and that will mean that our bucket will start to overflow. So the fuller the bucket is, the more stressed we become. So what we're trying to do is to reduce the water in our bucket by using healthy coping mechanisms and keep on draining it, so that when we get an extra stressor in that we didn't plan for, that we have that little bit of capacity to deal with it and be more solution focused rather than getting stressed and panicked about it. So do we have POS? Now all of us can actually have a look at this and see, do we have boss? So do we feeling exhausted? So the most common feature of boss is feeling exhausted, tired, drained most of the time, not being refreshed by sleep and rest. And as I said, it's the most common feature, and there's no energy. But it is important that we're not looking at depression here. We are looking at feeling burnt out and feeling tired, and just perhaps being a bit overwhelmed. But of course, it's a warning sign as well. So when we also, the next symptom or the next feature would be cognitive dysfunction, having poor concentration and memory, attention problems, and often it is just having this brain fog, just feeling that you can't think straight. It's too much information, and I'm not concentrating, I can't focus, and so on. And when you have a day like that, it's really important to look at what does your diary look like. So often when I have a day like that, I have about 4 or 5 back-to-back meetings, and by the last meeting you are literally brain fried, that you can't think straight anymore. And it's then really looking at your diary management. For me, I have to look at it and say, actually, I can't do more than 3 meetings a day, and making sure I have a little bit of break in between. And it's for all of us. It is not easy to always say no, and there's often demands on times and competing demands on our times. But it's about saying, okay, how can I balance this out, making sure that you still have enough time in your day to be able to do the actions following from the meetings and all of those things. But it's about also knowing, for example, my time around concentration is probably at about 3:30 in the afternoon. I find that I actually can't fully concentrate in a meeting, and that's probably better for me to just not have a meeting at that time of the day and maybe do something else at that time of the day where I can just pace myself better. And it's not a bad thing. I think it's quite healthy to be able to recognize that and actually look at it and being really proactive about managing your time around your best productive times of the day. Negative emotions. If you have somebody that's always been really happy-go-lucky and friendly and humorous, and suddenly they become quite negative and cynical and irritable with low tolerance, perhaps to increasing demands on their day, starting to have arguments at work, perhaps having a bit of self-doubt and overwhelmed, then the warning flags would go up with regards to, is this person perhaps becoming quite burnt out? Do we need to look at workload? Do we need to at time management and all of those things? Social withdrawal, starting to keep to oneself, not looking forward to seeing friends and families, is another feature of burnout stress syndrome. And at work, often it is the person that used to go out of the group, maybe to the canteen and have lunch and coffee together, and suddenly they go on their own, or they stay behind in the office. Probably again start to take note of that. And if it's you, looking at what is it about that you just don't want to socialize anymore. Is it just because you're just feeling so tired and sometimes just want to just have your own space, which is all right as well. But when it's linked to feeling burnt out, it is really important not to get caught in that negative behavior in a sense. And then, of course, when we look at work performance, it's reduced work performance, less productive, loss of drive and pleasure from work, and procrastination. Now, we're all working and enjoying our jobs to an extent, otherwise we wouldn't be here. But it's when you start to lose that pleasure from work and start to procrastinate, and it's a new pattern to you, then it's often, is this a sign that I have developed boss, or that I have boss, and I need to look at that. So this is a really nice scale to measure, to see how burnt out you are, and it's really quite apt that it is actually matches as being burnt out. So of course, ideally we would all probably hopefully be in the first 2 matches there, but reality is that a lot of people might actually be in the middle. And the scary part is that a lot of people might actually be towards the extreme end of feeling burnt out already. And I'm sure we've all worked with people, that's actually burnt out to that extent, or have seen people, that is so burnt out. So if you look at the instructions around the measure, is to how burnt out are you feeling? So it refers to feeling physically, mentally, emotionally exhausted. And as you can see, even with this definition, the exhaustion is the key to feeling burnt out. So select the match that best represents how burnt out you are currently feeling. So if you're choosing, if you look at the top line that's got the 6 matches in, if you're choosing the first 2, then you'll be probably in the healthy zone. If you're the middle, you probably need to take a break and look at routine, you're managing your time and all of that. If you're in the last 3 zones, then that's really your warning signs, and your red flag should be going crazy now, because this is really quite an unhealthy zone to be in. And the second one has more matches. It's actually got 8 matches. And again, select a match that best presents the extent to which you currently feel physically, mentally, and emotionally exhausted. It's the same measure, it's just 2 extra. And again, if you're in the first 3, you're probably in a relatively healthy zone. The middle 2, well, the middle one is probably going into, it's all right, but it's probably heading into the wrong direction. And again, the last 4, especially the last 2, if you're there, you're already at breaking point, and that's a really unhealthy point to be. So if you're heading from the 5th match onwards to being burnt out, to just be ash, then I would certainly say to you, seriously look at your stress levels, and look at what's causing the stresses, and looking at your coping mechanisms around it, because that is a very unhealthy space to be in, and it is probably a matter of time before you will feel that you really quite overwhelmed and not coping at all. So how do we become the boss of boss? So one of the first things is to develop stress resilience, and stress resilience is one of those concepts that's quite abstract. We all know to some extent what it means, but we don't really know what it means. So it really is the process and outcome of successfully adapting to difficult or challenging life experiences through mental, emotional, and behavioral flexibility, and adjusting to external and internal demands. So it really just means that whatever life throws at us, we can just adapt to it, and we adapt to the changing life's demands. It's not always easy. We're not saying that it's, everybody will look at it, that being stress resilient, that you won't feel stressed. It is the way we're dealing with the stress. So it's about maintaining our mental health despite the exposure to the physical and mental adversity, to the psychological and physical adversity, and it's our unique coping capacity to cope with life stresses. And it doesn't mean that the person won't experience difficulty or distress. It just means it is the way we are looking at it. So it is becoming a little bit more solution focused, not being caught up in the emotion of being stressed, but looking at what can I do about this situation, and develop that almost mental flexibility around coping with stress, and just almost go with the flow to some degree. So there's a few characteristics of stress resilience, and sometimes when I talk about it, people are like, well, how can you expect me to be positive and use humor when I'm so stressed out? But actually it really does change the way we experience stress if we have what we call, if we use optimism. So looking at positive copers, looking at what gives us hope, having a good social network, and expect positive outcomes. And it's often, we often look, and we know this, we often look at the worst case scenario and we predict the worst possible outcome. But the reality is that there's the other side of the coin, and it's not often that the worst possible outcome will actually happen. Of course it does, but as a norm, the things that we predict normally does not occur. And if we look then at pro-social behavior, this is such a nice term, it's being really proactively, socially, not accepting towards people, but really going out to look for support, to volunteer. And somebody said to me, they volunteer by walking going to a shelter, that have dogs, and they go and walk the shelter dogs, and they're saying it's like soul food. They really go out and they just love spending the time with the dogs. The dogs get the exercise, they get exercise, and they feel so much better about themselves because they volunteered and really added some value to the animals. Building relationships and supporting others. And we looked a little bit about the social isolation as part of the features of burnout stress syndrome. And I will often say, or actually do it myself, is when I go into the canteen and I see somebody sitting alone, I'll go and say hello, and actually, obviously if I know them, and just have a chat, because sometimes all that you need is just having that little bit of a chat and just having a friendly face. It might be intrusive at times. People might be busy and might not want company, but often, when we do that, people actually do enjoy it, and they actually do enjoy having that chat, with somebody. And I certainly, when I go on site, I talk to everybody because I just love to talk to everybody. But and I feel better for it. So hopefully other people feel better for it as well. Active coping, using the humor, being solution focused, looking at behavioral change. What can I do differently to deal with the stress instead of just getting stuck in the same behavior pattern? And then cognitive appraisal. So all the CBTers out there is really becoming aware of runaway thoughts, restructuring negative thinking, becoming aware of worrying and ruminating about things. And again, as I said, often we predict the worst case scenario that don't always come true. So looking at the CBT, of course, we have to bring it in, is taming the runaway thinking. Thoughts can become like wild horses, and it's about bringing it back and pulling it back and becoming aware of different thinking styles like rumination, the cyclical thinking the same thought over and over again, catastrophizing, predicting the worst case scenario, and worrying. And often I use the analogy of worrying is like somebody sitting in a rocking chair, lots of movement but going absolutely nowhere. And it's about really tuning into those thoughts and the worrying thoughts, and actually really starting to challenge it. But often just the awareness that I'm ruminating or catastrophizing or worrying or making catastrophic predictions helps us to just bring the thoughts back and become aware of it and interrupt those thinking patterns. So what can we do about it? So very basically is becoming aware of those thoughts, interrupt the thinking cycle, and often it's about saying, I am worrying now. How is this helping me? And refocusing and redirecting it, perhaps looking at a solution if you can. And if you can't do anything about it in the next couple of days, then it is a worry, and it's about becoming aware of that this is a hypothetical situation. It's not actually reality. And until you get to this situation, or until it comes true, there's actually nothing you can do about it, because it's literally all in our head. And it's really about just becoming aware of worrying and looking at, is this thought helping me, perhaps by thinking I have a plan, by planning, preparing, or any of those things, and just trying to come right back to this moment in time, instead of going away in our minds to situations that might never occur. At this stage, I would have asked if anybody has any questions. So if you do have questions, you can always contact the staff wellness group, and they can forward it on to me, or you can email me. You're welcome to. So looking at the roadmap to overcome boss, I really quite like this, because I think it's really quite apt. It's about seeing, what do I need to do to overcome boss. So the first one is, you have to become aware of your symptoms and causes. What is your symptoms of burnout? Are you exhausted? And then what is causing it? Is there anything specific causing my exhaustion? Is it just work-life balance? Is it, what is it that's causing me to feel so burnt out? And once you actually know that, you can actually do something about it. So the second step is absolutely to prioritize self-care. Your sleep, your diet, exercise. Make sure you take your annual leave, looking for support, and then obviously also looking at perhaps employee assistance program. And it really is about saying, even if we look at working from home and working on site, often people working from home never take their breaks. Because they're too scared to leave the computer because somebody might think that they're not doing their job. Making sure you take your breaks, making sure you have a balanced working day, and all of that. And I will be talking about it in 2 minutes. I'll talk about that as well. But really, it is about looking at self-care. Are you getting exercise? Are you taking your leave? And I quite like the fact that at St. Pat's we have the rule that we have to take all our annual leave, and we can only carry over a certain amount of days to the next year, because it really forces us to take leave. Are you taking just a day here and a day there, or are you taking at least a week or two that you can have a proper break and have a proper rest so that you can come back all full of energy to come and do the job again? And then again, looking at the cognitions, looking at our thoughts and doing that appraisal of our thoughts, shifting our perspective, challenging those negative mindsets and the assumptions that we have. If we look at the catastrophizing, the predictions and all of that, really basic way to look at it is asking yourself, what's the other side of the coin? If this thought is so negative, but actually what is on the other side of it? And it just stops us in our tracks by asking ourselves, but what's the other side of the coin? Or is this true? And is this thought really true? And we often be surprised by just taking that moment of that reality orientation that takes place. Reduce the job stresses. It's really important that we take our breaks, and often we're so busy, that we don't have time for breaks. I hardly ever take a break in the morning or in the afternoon. I have a coffee, but I have it at the desk, and it's really bad. And sometimes I just leave the office and go and play with the cat for 5 minutes, and it is really amazing just how much it actually helps to just feel that you're having a little bit of a break, and how much it actually helps to just get that moment away from the office. And it is about really giving yourself almost permission to take that break, because as I said earlier on, when you work from home, sometimes there's this a subconscious pressure that you shouldn't leave your desk, because if somebody phones and you're not there, they might think that you're not working. In the meantime, you could be gone to the bathroom, get a cup of coffee, or as I go and say no to the cat. Have boundaried working hours, and this is very important for people working from home. When we go to the office, I get on the train, I get the train in, I get to the office a specific time, I work my office hours, I leave, I get on the train, I get back home. And that commute on the train, very healthy, gives you that break between work and home. If you work from home, you have to almost bring that commute into your day, because what often happens is, and I look at the team working with me, I can see when somebody's online already at 8:30 in the morning, way too early for them to start, but they might then leave at 4:30, or they might work until 5:30, and then I know this person is working way too many hours, and really keeping an eye on their work-life balance, and to make sure that they take their breaks, and actually, why are they starting to work so early? Why are they working way over? And I'm certainly not saying we have to have this, I only work from 9 to 5. That's absolutely not. But we're looking at behavior patterns around overworking, being perhaps too anxious to let go of work when they work from home, and things like that. And that's really important to be aware of that. Are people taking their breaks? Are they taking their lunches? Are they always working for lunch? That's not healthy. Having boundaries between your work day. So working from home is almost have a commute time. I take a walk around the lake, which is only takes 10 minutes, but it's a little walk around the lake, and that's my going from home to work time. And then often after work, I will do something very different to be able to almost commute from the office back to home, so that I don't have work in my head all the time. So it's really looking at your working environment. If you're working from home a lot, what are you doing around getting your boundaried work hours and boundaried home time, so that you're not in work all the time, and also not allowing home to intrude into work all the time. It has to have a balance at work both ways. Know your limitations. I know 3:30 in the afternoon, I'm tired, and I now take a break. As I said, I might do a walk around the garden, I might have a coffee, I might play with the cat, and then if I just have 10-15 minutes just out of the office, I feel much better and more energized. And it is important to reduce our work stresses and to balance our time, balance our diaries. And I know all of you probably know this anyway, but the difference is, do we know it? We can know it, but we don't always do it. So it's about, again, coming back to the basics. And increasing the stress resilience using those optimism, active coping, pro-social behavior, and our moral compass. Our moral compass is there that will keep us, in line with our work ethic, and will also make sure that we look after ourselves as well. And then seeking out meaningful connections at work. And it's really good when we go on site, because we actually do have those meaningful connections at work. We talk to people, we link in with colleagues and friends that we probably haven't seen for ages. But it's really important to do that when working from home as well. How many times, for those of us working from home, do you actually have that meaningful connection with your colleagues, or do you feel quite isolated? And I make a point of, I have about 4 or 5 people that I contact every week, and just to make that meaningful connection so that I don't feel isolated, I don't feel lonely. And that support system and that meaningful connections is so important, that you continue to feel as part of a team, and that you're actually part of the St. Pat's family. And I know it might sound really like airy-fairy, but it is really important to feel that sense of connectedness. And then the last thing is and again, it's that soul food, isn't it? Getting something that makes you feel better. What are you doing for yourself? Are you meditating? Are you journaling? Do you use a gratitude diary? What is your soul food? What do you do to feel better? It could be going to the gym. It could be reading a book. It could be listening to music. It doesn't matter what it is. It's about making sure it's there, so that you look after yourself, and that you just cherish yourself a little bit more than maybe what you've done up to now. So as managers, how can we reduce boss? So how can the bosses reduce the boss? So, and that can be the management, the leaders, and it's any manager at any level in an organization. So watch out for boss in the team. The signs can be subtle. Increased absenteeism, performance deteriorating. We all know get to know our teams quite well, so we will know when somebody's not really doing how they normally are. Their behavior's changed a bit, or there's a little bit more negativity and cynicism coming in. Set limits on workloads. Be aware of the yes person. We all have that yes person, and that the most perfect staff that you can work with, because if you want something done, that's the person I'm going to ask, but that's not really healthy for that person. So it's really about helping people to also learn to say no, and not using the same people, or not asking the same people all the time to do something extra. And the yes person is often overworked because they can't say no. So I will often make sure that if I start to ask the same people to do extra things, I start to really pull back and say, well, actually no, this is not good for this person, and might look then at some other members of the team that might have a bit of capacity as well. So, but it's about being really tuned into your team, and being really tuned into where they're at, and what are you seeing that they might not be 100% aware of. Insist on breaks. And it is nice to have people that never take a break, but it's not healthy. It's not healthy for them, and it's not healthy for us in the end. So it's really important, especially if people are working from home, that they can't often go to the canteen and have that chat and so on, is make sure that people have their rest periods. Make sure they work sensible working hours. All of us like to work flexible working hours. Sometimes we start earlier and finish a bit earlier, or start a bit later and finish a bit later, and all of that. And that's fine, and it's between the staff member and their manager to see how they work it. But making sure that people are working sensible working hours, and that they're not overworking and not working too many hours as well. And they have the right to disconnect They have the right to put their computer off. If I'm working until 6 at night, I shouldn't be contacting my team after their normal working hours. They have the right to only respond the next working day. And reduce excessive overtime. Now, and it depends obviously where people are working as well, but it's not healthy. It's not healthy for people, obviously, and I know everybody knows that. Looking at team building, respecting a respectful work environment, and no tolerance of bullying and harassment, because obviously we don't work in an organization where we tolerate bullying and harassment, and providing support and making sure that people are aware of the employee assistance program if they need to access it. And then, of course, mindful movement. So mindful movement is so good. So, and again, as I said earlier on, if I feel really tired, I go for a walk in the garden, or I go and play with the cat or whatever. And that's mindful movement. Is it gets the energy going. And it is really, mindful movement is just about becoming aware of the environment and slowing your movement down. If you go for a walk, really becoming aware of what's around you, what is in front of you, what are you seeing, what are you hearing, and all of those things. And it is such a healthy way of sometimes of de-stressing. It's just by moving your body, but really slowing it down so that you feel every muscle, every little tension in your muscles, and stretching and all of that. And it's really good to do a mindful movement session if you are feeling stressed out. Now, normally if I do this to a group of people, I would actually do mindful movement with the group, but you're welcome to just even just use your hand and becoming aware of moving your fingers, and really becoming aware of every single little bit of stretching it and feeling what it feels like, and even go from your little finger through every finger to your thumb, and just slowing that movement down of maybe clenching your fist and stretching your fingers, and really becoming aware of every single movement and what the sense of actually moving your muscles. And that is my talk on burnout stress syndrome. I really hope that you found it interesting. And as I said, if there's any questions, you can always email me, or you can go to the staff wellbeing team, and they can send a question on to me, and I will answer that with pleasure. Anyway, have a lovely day, and thank you very much.